You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, Jorge Valenzuela.
This is education coach Jorge Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it.
My name's Matt Miller. I'm the author of Ditch That Textbook. Today, we've got Jorge Valenzuela, who's going to share some of the practical things that he will coach teachers to do. Jorge, thank you so much for being a part of this. Can you tell everybody just real quick who you are and what you do?
I'm Jorge Valenzuela. I'm an education coach, author, now speaker. I live in Virginia. I'm originally from New York, and I coach all around the country and online, of course.
The place that I started to find Jorge was on social media. This guy is like all over all of the channels and you know, has a nice polished look and everything. So it was easy for me to catch on to him. And then we met at a conference and got to chat for a little bit. And Jorge, I think just your path to becoming an education coach is an interesting one and could be encouraging to other folks and maybe help other folks kind of see, you know, sort of themselves in your own story. So could you just tell us a little bit about, you know, how you became that and how that journey has sort of evolved over the years?
For folks that are already coaching or are interested in coaching, I would have to say is to keep things organic. My journey has been completely organic. There's nothing that I've set out to do. Now I'm a lot more intentional, but in the beginning I was very organic. I had a mentor when I first started teaching. His name was Tony Casabit. He's retired now, but he said to me, before you design a lesson, before you buy books, before you buy equipment, before you go to professional development, before you hire a speaker, before you do anything, always ask yourself, what do the kids that I teach need? Yes. And start there. I became an instructional specialist in my district down in Virginia, Richmond City Public Schools, and I was responsible for 40 teachers. I was responsible for all of their instructional needs, PD, conferences, equipment, books, everything, you name it. And I realized that from central office, my colleagues and I at times were asking people to do things that we didn't know how to do ourselves. At the time, I remember learning what the difference is between a transactional leader and a transformational leader. A transactional leader is someone who says, well, okay, here's the curriculum, here's the books, here's the PD, now figure it out. That doesn't always work. It doesn't work for everyone. I wanted to be the person that can work with instructional leaders and teachers and help them develop their pedagogy, skill sets, and their abilities to do the work they do, either with teachers or with kids. I joined an organization called the Buck Institute for Education. I became a master teacher. Part of learning about project-based learning as a pedagogy and how to facilitate it and how to design projects was me having to be trained around the country and then work with schools around the country. I never did that thinking that I would become a national coach. Never. I was thinking, well, I would do this to help the 40 teachers in my district that I was responsible for. After a few years of doing that, that's not an easy job, and it's even harder now, I would say. I just became a coach. I became a person that people leaned on, that would hire all year round. And through writing, it just got me exposed. And then through national conferences like ISTE, then I just became known. So that's how it happened. My business on December 1st became 7 years old, but I started doing this nationally in 2014. It's a 10-year journey. And before that, since 2007, I've been coaching adults in my district. So you're looking at the evolution of almost a 20-year journey.
Yeah. Don't they say that overnight, if you want to become an overnight success, it takes about 10 years?
In this business, I've only seen a couple of people that were overnight, and it didn't last long.
It doesn't last. Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly the way I've seen it too. So I loved hearing you talk about sort of your journey, your evolution to what you're doing today. And one of the things that struck me was when you said that you were starting to ask teachers to do things that you all either didn't know how to do or weren't able to do. It was something sort of like that. And I thought, man, that is really great self-awareness. And I would imagine that that's got to be a crucial thing if you're working with adults in a school district, or if you're working with adults outside of your school district, or even if you're working with kids, right? Is to have that self-awareness to realize either I don't have the skill to do this yet, or I still need to learn something more myself or whatever. I just wondered if you could speak to that. Am I like touching on something right there?
Yeah. Back in the day, teachers, we did not like to admit what we don't know.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. It was one of those things where I had a couple of my teachers that knew me when I was a teacher. So we all came up together, and now I'm responsible for them. And they're like, George, now this is behind closed doors, outside of PD, outside of conferences. Hey, George, dude, come on, man. How do you really do this?
Yeah.
Can you show me how? As my friend is asking me, I'm realizing they didn't have this experience. So me regurgitating what the superintendent or what the director said and expecting them now to implement was really nonsense. When I realized that, I remember speaking to other lateral colleagues, but they wouldn't admit it.
Yeah.
So now, whenever I am doing any type of workshop where it's just instructional leadership folks in front of me, I always share that story. That from central office, we were asking people to do things we didn't know how to do. And I hope by sharing my story in a way that is not an origin story, it's a conversion story. It's a story where I had a problem that I had to overcome. And this is what I did. I became what the people in front of me needed them to be.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I'm hoping that it causes them to now reflect and to now be vulnerable and to say, well, you know what? I can learn this too. There's a reflection I do in my workshops when we're talking about core instruction. You see, every district needs an instructional model. They need a go-to set of ideals. They need a framework of what their written curriculum is or their scripted curriculum is, how it's facilitated, how we're monitoring engagement, assessment, teaching, monitoring ourselves. I always have them reflect just on the core foundational teaching things. Where am I at with this? And I never ask them in a workshop to say where they're at.
Yeah.
That's between them and themselves and their thoughts. I then provide a resource where they can start to begin to understand this as a framework, each of the components of the framework as actual little pieces of the engine that they can work on throughout the school year. Until now, they can say, okay, I know this, I can coach this, I can monitor this, and now we can move on to the next thing.
Yeah, for sure. One other thing that I picked out that I wanted to bring up that you mentioned earlier is, whenever you get something from the district office that everybody's supposed to do or something like that, I heard a version of you saying that it was your job to translate it for everybody, to kind of like help them understand it and everything. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because I found that for me, sometimes my most important work whenever I go work with a school or a school district or whoever is to help them understand how something fits into their day-to-day life, to like take this big picture idea and then say, okay, how does this actually show up in a classroom? And to me, that's like translating it into words that they can actually use.
Well, I think you just answered the question, because honestly, I think historically and traditionally, the job of the coach or the person that has the title of coach is to translate what central office is saying that has to be done. And I think after COVID, I think that's done. I think people are no longer going to sit in PD passively and just accept what's being said. They have to know, number one, I believe this, and I've seen this 100 times, millions of times. I've seen that they have to know that we care. That's the first thing, that we care about our profession, we care about them, we care about students. And I always write this down. Like, in fact, I write this down as my intention or my why for all of my workshops, to help students get the teachers they need in order to be successful. I have found over and over again that when teachers get the PD delivered that way, where it's practical, everything you just said, this is how it fits into what I'm doing. This is not adding to what I'm doing. This is shifting a mindset. It's a paradigm shift. I'm looking at things in a different way. So my thoughts are changing, my behavior is changing, and my outcomes are now changing. One of the things I've seen in schools, and I'm in schools, that you can look at my timeline for the last few years, I'm in classrooms not just in the auditorium, not just in the media center doing PD. I'm actually in the classroom working with folks that lead instruction, including teachers. I always request teachers because we should never be talking about teachers or be making decisions about teachers if they're not represented in the room.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen is that we have to look at what's happening and have everyone in the room agree on what we're seeing, then design what's needed in that classroom. And then me as a coach is to now either I model it or we get somebody in-house that has the expertise to model it. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to lose them to someone else.
Yeah. No, that's great. In fact, I wanted to kind of follow up on something you were just mentioning there, which is how you're in classrooms. And so for somebody who works as a tech coach or an instructional coach or something like that, like, how does that work? And what are you trying to, how do you get yourself ready to get in there? What are you trying to accomplish while you're there? Because I would imagine you have a couple of audiences. You have the audience of the students who are supposed to learn, but then you also have the audience of the teacher who's watching you model and everything. So I wondered if you could touch on that a little bit.
So I'll be honest, as far as being a tech coach and all of that, I can't call myself that. When I'm at tech conferences where that's the theme of the conference, then that's when that side of George comes out. Yes, my teaching license is in computer science. A lot of my early work is about computer science. A lot of my work now with AI is not so much on being the AI expert, but it's more about how I use AI in my everyday work, which is instructional innovation. Teaching teachers how to understand their own intrinsic motivations for why they do what they do, helping them to build some confidence, right, in teaching, but having them look at, okay, what am I teaching? What's my curriculum? How am I facilitating it? And how am I monitoring? And how am I managing? Part of that is building relationships. It's a lot of different things. What I do when I work with a director or an assistant superintendent or a superintendent of instruction, and they're looking to improve instruction, I always say to them, look, let's go into the classrooms and see what's going on first. Now, in some spaces, they've already been doing this, but maybe they haven't included teachers. Maybe they're not sure what to look for. I just go for the very basic thing in the beginning. Is there an objective on the board or a learning outcome, a goal? If it is on the board, if it is somewhere visual in the classroom, is this the topic of conversation between the kids and the teachers? Yeah. Is it what the lesson is about? And if kids are working, if they're collaborating, if they're designing, if they're building, is this the end goal? Is the end goal of what they're doing the follow through of that learning goal? And a lot of times it's not always, but a lot of times it's not. So we know that we have to now help teachers understand about differentiation. For example, if we're walking into any classroom in the beginning, the middle, or the end, and someone is in the front and they're talking at the kids, and you look at the kids and some got their heads down, some are on the phone, they're not engaged, then we know that we have to change things up. So that's really where we start. And my goal is to get everyone on the team working with me to see and say the same thing. And if we can find themes in our individual data pieces, now we know, okay, we can design our PD as interventions for solutions that we're looking for. A solution is kids engaged. A solution is kids ready to learn. Is kids improving reading and writing and math.
Right.
So the intervention has to be this. And sometimes the intervention can't be facilitated in 90 minutes. Sometimes it's in milestones, milestone 1, 2, 3, and we have different strands, some for those who have to manage instruction, support instruction, then for newbie teachers, or for those who are really struggling, and then for those who are more seasoned, who are more veteran, that already have their core teaching down. So now we want to give them some more innovative things like artificial intelligence integration or tech integration.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I said a whole lot there, and I hope it makes sense.
No, yeah, that's good. I mean, this is great to get to hear you kind of like talk about your craft, talk about what you do. So no, this is fantastic.
If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button.
please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. And now for a word from one of our sponsors.
Education is changing. Classrooms look different, and the future demands that our students be equipped for whatever comes their way. Educators play a huge role in helping prepare students for their futures. Defined Learning is a K-12 standards-aligned PBL solution that provides high-quality cross-curricular performance tasks across content areas such as ELA, math, science, social studies, computer science, and more. The hands-on projects are based on real-world situations and allow students to apply their learning. Education is changing. Give students the tools and experiences to recognize their futures and make an incredible impact on the world. Defined, the authority on applied learning.
We had the pleasure of listening to George this morning on project-based learning, and he shared his story that his aunt encouraged him to go into education. And she was absolutely right. He is so talented at sharing information in a way that is easy to digest and is inspiring to go back and actually implement and make change.
So my takeaway is that Mr. Valenzuela was very inspiring. He was very motivational and helped me to think about a new way of getting my teachers excited.
When I set out to do a workshop, my key deliverable is energy. And this momentum is used to make connections, inspire, educate, and ultimately transform the audience, so that they're compelled to take that same energy back to their schools and communities. And although we have fun, we tackle the hard topics of today, like educational policy, pedagogy for improving curriculum and instruction, and empowering today's students by connecting our work to the needs of the workforce. So please consider Lifelong Learning Defined for your next keynote, workshop, or conference, and overall instructional and educational coaching needs. My name is George, and I hope to connect with you soon.
We would love to have him come and do some work with us and help us be a little more successful and help our students to be more successful.
I move around a lot of schools, and we're seeing a huge disconnect. A lot of teachers that have come from non-traditional pathways, especially in the past few years. And so just interactions, expectations is really the first step. All of my teachers, raise your right hand, and please repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my students. All of my administrators, all my directors, all my principals, all my coordinators, raise your hands, please, your right hand, and repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my faculty and staff. Thank you.
Okay, so I want you to coach us for a little bit here as far as like some of the things, some of the things that you encourage teachers to do, so that if somebody's watching this and they're not, wanting to be a coach, like they'll be able to get something out of this too. So talk to me just a little bit, if you would, about some of the like strategies that you've implemented for, like instructional leadership and teaching skills, like that kind of stuff among teachers.
Stephen Covey, Franklin Covey, right?
7 Habits and all.
Right. He has a protocol for having a difficult conversation, a come to Jesus conversation. I was so inspired by this that I started to think of ways that I can maybe design my own protocol of how to have a conversation with a teacher or someone I'm coaching. First things first, I'm observing instruction. Okay. And when I'm observing instruction, I'm looking more at how the children are responding to instruction. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is this. I'm only in there maybe 10, 15 minutes. So there's no way that I got the full picture of what that person was doing in a short amount of time. So the very first step in my protocol is to ask any clarifying questions. Mm-hmm. Hey, when that was happening, what was going on? When that kid was raising their hand did you see it? I'm not assuming anything.
Yeah.
Once I know exactly what was happening, it's been clarified for me. Now I can start feedback. So the very first thing I do are some affirmations.
Mm-hmm.
I saw really good practice when you did blank. Very specific. And there's a reason for that. You want to start off a conversation in a positive way.
Yeah.
No matter who you've observed, they did something well. And that's got to be acknowledged. Now, the second thing is where you're now have to get to it, right? Here's your feedback. I like to start with a sentence stem where I wonder where you were trying to go when you did blank.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you noticed if all the kids were engaged. I wonder if the way that you facilitated this particular learning goal, if the kids truly understood the noun and the verbs.
Mm-hmm.
After hearing from them and seeing where they're at, now I can provide the resource or the tool or the practice I think it's going to help them. So now I start with, well, why don't you consider this? And then ending it with their reflection of what we just discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found that by taking these intentional steps, not really talking about what's in my mind and my head and my experience, but more about letting this person say what they have to say and pointing them in the right direction. As much as I know, if I don't know what to do, then I'll learn along with them. And I did it a lot. Mm-hmm. That's why if you look at my website, you'll see like 5 different strands of professional development, but you'll also see a bunch of different workshops. That's because 7 years of working in several districts every month and having different needs in different places, you develop all these different things. But if you look at everything I do, though, it's always tied back to instruction, instructional innovation of visiting classrooms and then designing from there. It's always looking at our curriculum and what we're integrating into it, whether it's STEM, it's computer science, AI, whether it's essential life skills, whatever it is. But it's always core foundational teaching, some innovative teaching where they've improved, and then monitoring that forever. Because instructional innovation is ongoing. It's an iterative process that if schools focus on forever, then they'll always know what the teachers and the kids need.
Yeah. This is great. I love that protocol, by the way. I mean, I'm imagining if you've got to go in and have one of those conversations, like you've got a couple of different scenarios. One, the teacher already knows what you're going to say. Probably, they probably know. And so when you come up and if you don't approach it in a certain way, I could see that there's hostility. Or I guess the second situation is maybe they don't know and they're caught off guard and then they get defensive. So I'm guessing that this all sort of like diffuses some of those conversations a little bit.
There's an article on Edutopia. It's called How to Provide Teachers Effective Feedback. It's by myself. And the protocol is actually at the bottom of the article. And it's a download. It's a PDF. It's got all the steps, everything I just said. But I think in that article, I also mentioned 3 types of teachers that I've encountered. And I've been doing this a long time now. I've been visiting classrooms about 17 years now. And what I have found is that you've got that teacher, she knows she's all of that. She's been around for a long time. She knows what she's doing. Oftentimes she knows better than who's supervising her. And you can't provide this person feedback the way you would to a newbie. Sure. It's a smack in the face. So you have to be aware of that. Then there's a teacher that just needs a nudge. That person thinks they're all that. There's some things that they do well, but there's some things that they need some work on. So if that person, it's like you said, their ego a lot of times is fragile. Anyone who thinks they've arrived and they got this on lock, we never arrive. Yeah. We're always going to meet someone that's on a different level. And we know it internally, but we lie to ourselves. For that person, they need a nudge. And you got to make sure as much as possible, you don't bruise their ego or you don't do it in a way where now you've lost them. And you have to know the difference. James Taylor is a coach for speakers. And he says that you need to know your target audience. Sure. 10% of people will do whatever you say. They understand the assignment. The other 10%, and these are dummy numbers, but it works, right? Yeah. Work with me. 10%, It doesn't matter who you've got with you, what you say or do, they just don't like you. They're not going to work with you. But then there's 80% that may be on the fence, but they care and they want to know that you care and they want to know that you know what you're talking about. Yeah. And then they'll buy in. That's your target audience. That's who you want to speak to. I really do believe this. With every person, there's common ground, except with self-centered people. And there's different levels of being self-centered. People that are selfish, the people that think the world revolves around them, folks that speak about themselves all day. Sometimes you can reason with them, but there's some folks that fall way below that. It's nothing you can do except say, hey, have a good day. And then the last person is the struggling teacher or the newbie or the person that got a textbook and a lecture in school. So they don't really know what to do. This person, you really have to have a lot of empathy and remember where we once were. Every person in education started somewhere. It used to be this. I believe this. And I'm hoping that it does go back to this, but it might take a while. But I remember the first year being difficult. And then after that, it got a little bit easier, a little bit easier. I feel like after COVID, it gets harder and harder and harder, especially for folks that don't have a blueprint, don't have a playbook, don't understand core instruction, don't have the ability to build relationships with people, don't empathize with others and try to understand where they're coming from. One of the things that really annoys me about our society now, and this happened at our Thanksgiving, not dinner, but afterwards, a friend of ours came and there were two people that just see the world in a different way. I had to step in and say, look, in this house, this is how we do it. Yeah. If we engage in the conversation, we're engaging to understand, not to tear down and not to prove another person wrong. Because to be honest, I don't really think anybody really knows what's going on. As much as they think they do.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more that I don't think that I understand what's really, really going on, you know?
I'm really convinced now that I can't believe anything on social media, number one. And number two, I realized that my opinion doesn't have to be pushed. People don't care unless if they're hiring me like you are right now to have a conversation, because now you care about this topic, but I don't have to push my opinions on people. I don't have to make myself heard everywhere I go. No, I just show up if I want to show up, right? Number one. And then number two, just have an organic conversation. Hey, how are you doing? I like the way you did that. And then we take it from there.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
And now for a word from one of our sponsors. If you're a STEM and PBL teacher like me, you're always on the lookout for new project ideas and resources. You know George does PBL, and I'm telling you, look no further than SmartLab. SmartLab really has a fresh take on STEM and PBL. I'm proud to be a partner, and they sponsor the podcast. But just don't take my word for it. Check out what other educators are saying about SmartLab.
When students enter into SmartLab, they are allowed to think outside of traditional norms.
It gives them a lot of agency. They feel empowered and important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the SmartLab environment and the way the project process is set up.
SmartLab becomes this place where they can do those things and have the time and space to like communicate better and even like deal with social emotional stuff. Like they're having a bad day, a SmartLab's a place where we can change the pace of what they're learning to match their mental needs for the day. And that comes back tenfold later on when they want to be there and they want to learn and they want to do stuff and they feel safe and they feel like they can get the things they need.
That's one of the big benefits of being in more of a collaborative environment is it makes you have to work. It makes you have to be accountable.
Please look in this episode's show notes for a link to connect with SmartLab.
Okay, so one thing I definitely wanted to talk to you about is something that's in your social media handle right there on the screen, which is, George does PBL. So, we gotta have a little bit of a conversation at least about PBL. So I just was curious, like when you've done this, what has it looked like? Or when you coach it, what are you like envisioning in your mind? Like, what do you want to get out? Because it seems like lots of people have different definitions of what PBL is and how it's introduced. And some people it's more comprehensive and big and ongoing. And some people it's like a one-off, one day thing. And, there's just all these different ways of doing it. What does it mean to you?
Let's go back about a decade. the top organization in education for professional development around the pedagogy of project-based learning was the Buck Institute for Education.
Right.
They became PBL Works because after years and years of gathering data from workshops and from long-term implementations, systemic implementations, we learned that PBL works. And that's why the organization is called PBL Works. Edutopia has also done extensive research over, I want to say about a decade and a half, maybe more. And they've looked at project-based learning as far as helping children in high poverty, children that are marginalized, reading scores, science, social studies. It works. Okay. Now, the thing I'll say about PBL is this. It's a research-based instructional approach.
Okay.
That's the first thing. It's not that the kids are designing something or doing something hands-on, so now we have a project. That's not what it is. The project is actually your unit plan. PBL is constructivist teaching, where teaching happens along a continuum. It's a process. So a project can't be a 1, 2, 3 day thing. It can't be that. So PD can't be a 1 day PD or a half day, or I got the 60 minutes with George, so now we're going to learn. No, project-based learning is an instructional methodology for how we plan projects and how we facilitate them. That takes time to learn. It's like anything. It takes time to learn. I was one of those original coaches that went out nationally and coached people. And we went through an extensive boot camp. It took 14 months to develop yourself into a real PBL coach. And you can go online and you can see my receipts. You see me coaching kids. You see me working with kids. Organizations that hired me locally to work with kids at the Math Science Center, I was like, hey, let's do it, but it's got to be recorded. Like, okay. And so these became my little artifacts of showing other teachers how to facilitate with kids, how to engage our community, how to engage our business partner, how to engage our parents. And you can see this all online. And how to then have young people show their learning, which is really the most important thing. I'd have to say around the 30th time of doing it, that's when I became an expert. That's how long it took.
Yeah.
So if I didn't see them in the boot camp, if I don't see them facilitating for an org or learning from an org like PBL Works, like now defined learning, I don't know. I don't know. And it's interesting to see how many PBL experts we're now going to have now that it's probably going to be a national initiative. So let's see.
Yeah. No, exactly. Now, if you're coaching teachers or working with students or whatever, what are some of the things that you always make sure that you let them know, that you always include in your training so that they can make sure that they get it right? Like what's some of your best advice to get it right?
Number one, know what your learning objectives are. What are you trying to accomplish with this project?
Yeah.
Then you have to be able to translate those objectives into student outcomes, student learning goals. Very simple. I can do this. The way to do that, I think, is to know your students and to know what they know, then to know what you want them to know. So, start there is how are you translating things? I don't know if you noticed, Matt, but if you look at my articles, if you hear the way I'm talking right now, I decompose as much as I can very complex things into a simple way so that the receiver understands it. When I was told, always know what your students need, always know what the people in front of you need, I realized that you have to explain things in a way that people can receive them. That's the first thing. And then I always say to them, look, in a project, you have some autonomy to do some things that you normally wouldn't do. Like in a math class, there's a lot of drill and skill, right? And I understand why, because those kids are going to be assessed at the end of the year. AP is like that as well. But the thing I'll say is when you do a project, do it for no more than 2 to 3 weeks at a time, 2 weeks, and do one a semester. Focus, yes, on the standards, on the competencies that are part of your outcomes, but also think about the essential life skills that young people will need in your class. Survey them, survey the parents. Don't just do things on your own. And then try to incorporate that or integrate those skills into the project so that young people can now become better developed, where they're learning about things that they're interested in, that they care about, that they'll need in the real world. But then we're also hitting on our reading, writing, math, and our academic content as well.
Yeah, yeah. If a teacher isn't at a school that where PBL is being pushed an awful lot, and they want to learn more about it, or they want to, try it themselves, or want to educate themselves or whatever, like what advice do you have for them? Do you have like some resources that you would point them to, or any like guidance or anything?
I have a couple of books, and I will give you the link for that. My book, Through Corwin, which we're now working on the second edition, which will be out in 2025. It's called PBL Plus, and PBL Plus is my brand of project-based learning. It really focuses on the essential life skills of young people and understanding where they are and how to empathize with them in a way that we're integrating and we're teaching things they care about and that they need, but also it focuses on your core foundational teaching.
Yeah.
Even while you're doing PBL, even knowing that everything won't be a project. So I do recommend that. I also recommend a few videos and a few articles, which I will share with you as well.
Okay. And we can definitely put those in the, in the session resources. So if you're watching this, go check out those PDF notes, and we'll have links to all of that stuff, which is great. Now, George, you just mentioned life skills. And I know this is an important part of what you do. Like you said, it's part of your approach to PBL and everything. Why do you think it's so important that this be incorporated into PBL, but probably I'm imagining just into teaching and learning in general?
I'm in a lot of schools, and we're seeing that a lot of young people are not engaged and motivated like they used to be for education. Yeah. A lot of them don't want to be there, not in all spaces. So don't take this as every single school. But in a lot of spaces I've been, there's a huge disconnect. The relationships between teachers and young people, or just the adults in the building. What young people need to understand is that part of the school climate and culture, it's also on them as well. Now, adults set the tone, but they also have to help design the classroom they want to be a part of. There's soft skills like good communication, collaboration, self-awareness, social awareness, having competency about how we're dealing with others and also how we're dealing with ourselves. In my book, in my article, I write about one life skill that's called knowledge of self. I was a kid that I grew up in foster care. I was in a group home. So knowledge of self, of my own heritage and ethnicity, I didn't know. So I adopted the culture of the kids at school. The teachers need to understand what they're working with and what they're dealing with in schools. And they need to understand, okay, young people need to be prepared for life, not just for the time that they're in my classroom. And we have to engage, motivate them. One of the things I've learned is that you have to understand why people are somewhere. What's their intrinsic motivation for being there? And a lot of times they're being forced to be there. You can look at their disposition, at everything about them. They may be angry that they just may not want to be there. There's not a connection. So you have to look at research. Well, okay, how do we now connect with someone? John Hattie said, you have to see learning through the eyes of your students. And what that means is that we have to know them as people, but also learners. You can assess them, you can grade them, you can ask them questions about the content, and you can know where they may be academically. You'll have some idea, but knowing them as people are always their interests, their goals, and their assets. Assets is what they're good at. So the only way to know that is to have high expectations for them. Number one, you have to believe in them. But two, positive interactions. Positive interactions that are helping you to build a culture and create a warm, engaging, lively climate that people want to be in. It's easier said than done, but these are the type of things that I think educators need to focus on in tandem with their teaching practice. These are life skills, not just for kids, they're for everyone.
Yeah. And don't you feel like, education's kind of coming to a reckoning where, we've got lots of kids and families and everything that are looking at traditional education and going, what am I getting out of this? What is this really, really preparing me for, And there's sort of been like an outcry on that kind of thing. And I just feel like, this focus on, this focus on life skills really roots it. It grounds the content that we're trying to teach. And so now it's not just, oh, this is in the curriculum, so I'm going to teach it. It's like it's translating again. I feel like that's kind of like the thread. That's kind of like the strand that's connected everything we've talked about so far is, we're just translating. Here's how this actually fits into real life. Does that make sense?
When I hear people talk like that, and I get why they say what you're saying.
Sure.
But what are we going to do about it? And who's going to fix it?
Yeah.
See, a lot of people want change, but people don't want to change.
Yeah.
They just want to point fingers at, well, it's because of them. They're doing this to me and they're doing this to us. Okay, but what are you doing about it? I know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I wonder about that. How will it be done well? Things have to be done well. They have to be done to fidelity, I believe. That's where I'm always focused at. Whatever I'm going to do, how am I helping teachers become the type of adults the young people need?
Yeah. Yep.
That's why.
There it is again. Yeah. I love that. All right. So to start to wrap this up a little bit, I wanted to take this big picture a little bit more because, like you've said, this has been a journey of, 10 years for you to try to build yourself. And I love that at the beginning, you weren't trying to become some like flashy, well-known, like famous celebrity coach or anything. You were just trying to help the teachers in your school. And I love that. And so I just wanted to kind of take it big picture like that. Like, let's talk shop just for a little bit. If somebody is an educator and they think, okay, I've learned some things that I have in my heart that I want to share with others. If they've got their own insights, their own experiences or whatever, and they want to be able to help other people like you did, what are some of the things that you've learned, as an author, as a podcast host, as someone who has, worked in other schools and has been in different places around the country and everything. If somebody sort of aspires to have a little bit bigger reach, a little bit bigger audience than just the teachers in their district, which, by the way, if the teachers in the district, your district are your audience, you have a huge audience that's going to impact tons of people. But if they aspire to something a little bit different or a little bit more than that, do you have any words of wisdom for them?
There's nothing wrong in asking someone how to do something they've done already and you want to do.
Sure.
The one thing I will say, and I try very hard, I take what I do extremely seriously. I'm up pretty early in the morning. I mean, you can see my output. And even then, even with all my hard work, I don't have the following you have because I'm not trying to do that. I just want a strong online presence because that's going to get me known and booked and all that. Yeah. But I take what I do extremely seriously, but I try not to take myself seriously.
Yeah.
You can see certain people, they're like, well, I'm promoting my business. And you see that your social media is a highlight reel of humble bragging. I mean,
we've talked about this before.
Right.
We've had conversations about this.
I try not to do that. I'd say what teachers should be doing is blogging. And I'd say now doing podcasting or edupreneurs. Blogging has historically been how you write about what you're doing on a daily basis. And you're reflecting and you're learning on best practice and you're refining and you're putting it out there so that other educators can also glean from it. Okay. If you want to be known, you have to put it in spaces or in online platforms that people actually go to. My work is not for my contemporaries. It's not for my friends. I'm not looking for their validation. I would love some support, but not validation or a pat on the back. I'm trying to help teachers. So I'm going to organizations that have a huge following because I don't have a huge following, right? And I'm fine with that. I would start there, just in writing, putting your ideas out there. There's a framework I use, some research, just a little bit so people know where you're coming from. 2 is your personal insight and practice. That's an important thing. You have to say how you're using this thing or how you're solving this problem. And then 3 or 4 steps someone can take to replicate your process. For folks that have been in a graduate program, are in a graduate program, it's like the chapter 4 in a dissertation. Someone should be able to look at your chapter 4 from point A to Z and follow it and replicate your process and your success. I'd say start there. If there's something specifically that you want to do, one of the things I did is I just wrote down what I wanted to do, but I wrote it in a way as if I already had it. Someone gave me a great book, How to Steal the Show. My man, Matt Miller.
That was me.
One of the chapters says, act as if.
Yes.
Now, I can't say that I learned it from there.
Yeah.
But I've been doing this a long time, and I write as if I'm already doing that thing. And the thing I've learned is that your brain, it produces chemicals, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. That goes out to the rest of your body. So it allows you to show up as if.
Yeah.
I have found that the universe, I'll say God, just makes everything happen in a way you've envisioned it and you've spoke about it, but then you put in the work. You have to put in the work.
Yeah, for sure. I love that you mentioned earlier that you weren't trying to get fame or accolades from your family or friends or from anybody like that. You said
in the beginning, I was, until I learned who I was and got my why straight. Here's the thing. I said this on a different podcast. No one is smarter than anyone, and no one knows more than anyone. No one is special. People just have more experience. Once I learned that, and I started to see my old self in rooms I'm entering now, I realized, okay, you've worked on yourself and you've been working on this one thing for over 10 years. That's why you understand it at a certain point. But then there's other people that understand it on a deeper level. There's a person that I have playing in the background a lot of the times before I do my thing. And that's Principal Kafele. The guy doesn't even need slides. He's the GOAT. I would say there's others, of course, Dr. Anthony Muhammad, Mike Mattis, people that I learn from. They're on a whole different level. I can't say, well, that's what I'm going for. No, I'm just doing what's in front of me right now. Yeah. What do the people in front of me need right now? And I have found in the past few years that the people in front of me have become a lot bigger. There's a lot of preparation. You can hear it. You can see it. There's a lot of prep that, goes into this thing, and you know it yourself.
Yeah. Well, I can speak to that because I've talked to you enough about the craft and the work and everything that goes on behind the scenes, and all of the prep work and all of the editing of videos and all of the hard work and everything. And I think the thing I was wanting to come back around to there is that the focus that you have, and that I know that I always try to have too, is how can this help teachers? It's like we know what our audience is. We know what we're trying to accomplish. I heard somebody say once that, if you want to be able to help people, if you want to be effective, if you want to be able to reach more people, then try to find ways to make their lives better, to try to help them to accomplish their goals, to do what they want to do. And you see so many people in our space where it's like, I can think of one person that I know that I follow on Facebook, and, this person is all about talking about the hustle and the grind and, oh, look how far I've come. And there's some value to some of that stuff, but it's an awful lot of let's pat this person on the back. And with me, I'm like, I've got this much opportunity in the emails that I send, the social media posts that I send and everything. I've got this much opportunity to support and empower teachers. And I don't need to ask for pats on the back. I need to try to give them what they need to save a little bit of time and to do their work. And it's like, if I can do that, that's what I want to be known for. I don't want to be known about like, here's all of the stuff that all the cool things that Matt's doing. Oh, look at Matt's workout. Oh, look at Matt's outfit when he's going to the airport to go to some speaking gig or something. Like, that's not me. I know who my audience is. I know how I show up, and that's how I show up. And I feel like that's something that you and I share.
I do want to say this, Matt. So this is the part of the show, even though it's your show, I have to give you your flowers. The only reason why I agreed to do this, I don't do a lot of podcasts where I'm being interviewed anymore. It's got to be something that I feel is special, that I feel it's for the right reasons, and that I feel it's going to the right people. What I'll say about you, brother, every time you show up on my timeline, every time you show up in my inbox, you're helping someone in a classroom, in a district, in an office, improve what they're doing in a very humble way. Now, I will say you are dynamic, you are engaging, you're very motivating. I think you've developed all of those skills. But I can tell that the reason why you have developed these skills is you are making the best of the opportunity that's in front of you of having all these folks now listening to you. Whether you planned it or not, only you know that. Regardless, you're showing up in a way the people need it. I have to respect that. That's why I ran up to you. I introduced myself to you. I don't do that a lot. I don't really do that. That's not my style. But you were a person that I said, okay, I have to meet this guy. I try not to be in people's faces like that, but we ended up having dinner that same night.
Yeah.
I would have never thought.
Great.
Fate had it that way, and now we're here now. For folks out there listening, I'll tell you what kind of a man he is if you only know his persona of Ditch That Textbook. This guy, he'll check on me and say, hey, bro, how are you doing? If we have a conversation, if I say, well, I'm working on this, he will buy me the book from Amazon and have it shipped to me. That's the kind of guy he is. And I'm not talking about his book, a book that he learned from. That's the kind of guy he is. Folks out there, support Matt Miller.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I didn't set him up to do this at all. So. Well, hey, George, this has been fantastic. I think anybody who is, interested in leading other adults, coaching other adults in the context of education has gotten a lot of nice little tidbits. It's always just nice to hear somebody who does the work talk about the work, and so I think there's been plenty of that in this. So if somebody's watching this and they want more Jorge Valenzuela in their life, like where are some places they can go? Where can we send them?
I'm on all social media platforms at George Does PBL. That is Jorge Does PBL, and also on my website at lifelonglearningdefined.com.
Wonderful. Sounds like you've done that on a podcast every once in a while.
Every week.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go. So there's another one we can plug too, is the podcast. Folks can listen to the podcast, right?
My show is called the Lifelong Learning Defined Podcast for Self-Improvement. It's a show that is focused on lifelong learning, and I invite friends of mine or people that are doing notable things.
Yeah.
The show, it focuses on their conversion stories, not their origin stories. Origin stories are great if you've accomplished something great and you're known for that. Mm-hmm. Typically, people don't care about origin stories if they've never heard of you or they've heard of you loosely. A conversion story is something that my guests had to overcome that relates to either their personal growth or their professional growth. And we do the show that way. It's not a very long show, maybe 20, 30 minutes. Sometimes if it's a person that has a lot to say and they've done a lot of great things, maybe 40, 45 minutes. But it's just a show about helping us see how other people have accomplished important things that were important to them. I make sure it's topics that I know people care about. Things that people talk about in their kitchen, at their dinner table, and when they see their family and friends.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a great show. Absolutely. All right. Well, George, hey, thank you again so much for being a part of this and for sharing your expertise and wisdom.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
All right.
Whether you're a teacher or administrator, you lead by walking alongside your students and your staff. You teach them what to do. You model for them. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't know what to do and you bring in a coach or a resource, you learn alongside them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the second thing is this. Give your people feedback, not pushback. Whoever you push back on, whether physically or verbally, they're going to do it right back immediately. And if they're intimidated by our position, our status, they're going to do it behind our backs and ruin our programs. My guy. I want to leave you on this note. Trajectories can be changed. When I was in 10th grade, here's a snapshot of who I was in 10th grade. There's a rapper named Rakim. I'm not sure if you guys know about Rakim, but he used to say, it's not where you're from, it's where you at. And I played that on my headphones at 16 years old every day until I believed it. And I'm showing you this because I'm seeing versions of this throughout American schools. This is your reality of what you have to face. If I can do it, any kid can do it, but they have to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with Jorge Valenzuela.